All right.
It looks like we're
Yeah.
live. I'm Jeff, and I'm here with Nemo and Alex for another episode of New World Chaos.
That's right.
Nemo, how's it going?
Yeah. Um, it's fun. The chaos is fun. I'm starting to enjoy it. Improvisation, it's a wonderful life skill. Yeah, so we're here. It's a pretty casual conversation. We tend to talk about things like philosophy and psychology, maybe a little bit of economics, and it's really open-ended. We usually let it go wherever it does naturally and just try to keep the conversation flowing. And me and Jeff are the co-hosts. So if you're new here, you'll see us every episode. And then we try to have a guest if we can. And today we have with us Alex, who's somebody I've talked with casually, kind of randomly on Counterweight, and we were able to get him on the show. And he's in the UK, and so this is very international, and we'll get to see how that affects the show, I guess. It'll be a cultural exchange.
Yay.
Hey, hello, good to be here. Uh, Nice to meet you. Uh, and I guess, yeah, let's see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah. Yeah, we were before the show started, we were talking about maybe some of the differences between police in the US and the UK. Um, and the joke that I made is sometimes people share it's like a meme. They'll compare pictures of United States police to like the UK, and then police in the US are kind of militarized compared to other areas. It's kind of heavy duty. And then just compared to the UK, it's like your police officers look like a circus to me, or like carnival workers. So it's a bit of humor there. But I take it that you were saying that it seems like the situation with police there is pretty different.
I mean, in many ways, so I guess the main difference is the lack of guns most police officers have in the UK. So I guess over there with the Second Amendment and guns being available, it's sort of understandable that there's this difference, but here not really, which overall is fine because you don't see a lot of these types of incidents as you see in the US, but you can also end up in bad situations for them because I recall at some point, I can't recall exactly when this happened, but I think it was one of the terror attacks when one of the guys, the terrorist, managed to stab a police officer while trying to make his way into parliament. He was taken down by like seven others, but yeah, in these situations, I would say they're more at risk than they are in
Hmm.
the US. Um, However, on the other side, you do get the same situation. Like, I guess you do get. So I don't know the stats here, and I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk like I know, but I would say there are issues to be looked at when it comes to racial disparities. However, I don't know if it's poverty or just race. So I wouldn't know the difference between. So like New York, you had stop and frisk, I think, in New York. So in London, there was stop and search, where kind of the same randomness, random element would get police to stop you on the street and search you if you were carrying any weapons or any drugs. And there was a racial discrepancy there. But yeah, when it comes to these things, it's never been clear to me if it's poverty or if it's race, because I don't think anyone bothered to check if there's a poor white community and the police treat them the same way as they would a poor black community. So
Yeah.
this
There's
is this is a question I have.
yeah. I have some of the basic idea of some of the situations. It's honestly anybody that wants to analyze things in the United States. I think you should pick a region and try to narrow it down and separate each subculture and different economies because otherwise it's just drastically varies a lot. There was a, sort of related to this. There was, I don't know if it was a photographer or a journalist, I don't remember who it was, but they took pictures in different parts of the US that basically, if you look at only the pictures, you could see what looks like a third world country, what looks like first world country, and then the kind of in between, if you want to label it that way, first and third. And so the idea is that there's such a drastic variation that and between like cultures and economies that it's like people are living in different worlds right next to each other. And I cross between those worlds a lot, and it gets really disorienting. Like geographically, at the job I'm at now, I'm basically right next to or right within the area where the courthouse is for Derek Chauvin's case. So geographically, I'm closer to some of the issues at the epicenter of social justice, but in the job itself, I'm very far from social justice compared to my previous job. So it's really weird. It's just, it makes it a big mess. And there's a lot of people that have ulterior motives and they want their story to be true because they either want to be a victim or a hero or whatever. And so it's a total mess. I don't even know where to start, honestly. Maybe just let's all admit where we're confused.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this adds anything, but so here in the UK, there was, so last year when the protests started happening and like after George Floyd, the UK government called for this report on institutional racism. And a few weeks back, it came out. And so it wasn't like the committee wasn't, they were all different races, different cultures, different types of people, different backgrounds, very mixed. They didn't find any institutional racism. So they do state that it is happening, but when it comes to economics, healthcare, policing, I think there was another one. It wasn't the main driver of discrepancies. They ranked higher, for instance, family situations. They ranked other aspects a lot higher because they see that white boys from working class backgrounds in the UK are very underserved. They're not the most underserved because I think it's Black Caribbean kids who are the most underserved. But they do see Indian and Chinese backgrounds overperforming, and they see it as family or cultural influence more than it is a race thing.
Yeah.
So
That seems to be the case where there's a lot of claims of uh, prejudice based on an unchosen trait like gender or race that correlation may be a thing, and then when they look into it, into these claims, they find that it's almost always an issue of economics and family context and maybe culture. But the differences between rich and poor, however you want to measure that, tend to be the most drastic and the driving forces behind these things.
yeah, I think there's some truth to that, and I also this one I overheard on the podcast. If you look at the discrepancies between rich and poor based on every race in the US, they're the same. So white rich people and white poor people have the same discrepancy. Black rich people and black poor people have the same level of discrepancy. So there is the biggest one is economics by far.
Hmm. Yeah. Jeff, you grew up in a situation that sounds like culturally and economically it's pretty different than, say, where you are now. Would you say that's true?
We were poor, but we didn't feel poor. Like, so I didn't grow up feeling poor, but looking back as an adult, I can see that we were poor. I don't know. I think I'm probably a bad person to ask on this issue, but even without the social justice stuff, when you look at this kind of stuff, it seems obvious to me from a distance that class has something to do with it. And I always find it curious why that's not focused on much, or that doesn't come out in discussions as much as race and the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty relevant. So I was talking with another person in Counterweight in a private message, and we're getting really in depth with some of this stuff and analyzing economic class. And um, this person comes off as a kind of fan of, say, Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, so people kind of like that as far as politics and maybe some economic theories or things that they value. So they're really interested in things like universal basic income or the idea is to try to create a foundation that the majority or ideally everyone in a community has something they can fall back on for resources so that they don't have to be struggling with poverty. And I tend to not come from that perspective. Um, and we were talking about some of my crazy, weird ideas. And something I'm exploring right now is instead of defining wealth and poverty kind of the traditional ways that are just solely around resources, materials, tangible things that you can put your hands on, um, what would happen if we defined wealth based on self-determination? And for anyone who's not heard of that, I've referenced it quite a few times. I'll give you the quick rundown. Self-determination theory's three universal needs. That's autonomy, so you make choices of your own life, and you have the right and the ability to do that. That's competence, so you have skills, you have knowledge, you have wisdom, and it's interconnection, so you have really supportive, healthy relationships with other people. And if I'm defining that as wealth, then poverty, I suppose, would be dependence, ignorance, and isolation. And so if we define things that way, I think it makes it totally different. Whereas if we're just looking at resources, it's not clear what people are actually struggling with. I don't want to make that too much of a rant, but that's kind of a hypothesis I was thrown out there recently.
I mean, Jeff, if you want to take this.
No, I don't.
I
It might
mean,
be
there's some truth to that, but so let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here. How would someone be autonomous when they're in a really bad situation in their life and their choices are very limited? So I guess that's like, yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah. Well, they're based on your description, it sounds like they have very low autonomy. Whether you want to describe it in quantity, saying they have little autonomy, or the quality of their choices is really low. And that's what I would see as a form of poverty. And uh, a lot of the work that I've done is in youth mentorship and around, I guess, economic counseling, and it's focused on empowerment. And so I've worked with a lot of people that have bad choices. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And what we try to do is learn about what their personality is, what their preferences are, what their immediate needs are, and then maybe try to get a little more long term. And so I'm trying to get to know that person really well as a unique individual, and that helps me imagine ways that they could make better choices. And so, in a way, they're borrowing my wealth, they're borrowing my skill and my knowledgeability of resources to help them get connected. And maybe they're borrowing my network, so relationships I've built personally and as a professional, and I've tried to help them get connected so they can make better choices. I mean, if you think of, say, something that's really simple, a job counselor. A lot of people that struggle with jobs, they're really disconnected. So their poverty is that they don't have the relationships to make it work, especially if it's like their first job. And so helping them get access to job networks or to training or other free resources like that, free education, is a way to give them that wealth of relationships, which gives them better choices. So it also increases their autonomy. So maybe that's a couple of examples of kind of how that works. Does that make
In,
sense?
yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm kind of agreeing with the theory. But yeah, I was just like, it sounded a bit idealistic, and I was just trying to see if practically how you would go about it. But yeah, you do bring up a good point. Like someone who's in a bad situation can get out of it by expanding the knowledge and their areas of expertise. So
Yeah.
it could be something into that, and I think that's sort of the it's sort of similar to Jordan Peterson style of self-improvement. I do see more and more that there's this new philosophical approach coming, which is similar to what you're describing. So you may be onto something there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I've had a hard time for most of my life trying to cover this gap between me and other people as far as our perspectives. And so there's always a huge gap a lot of the time. I think uh like for a lot of people they seem to have a hard time understanding what my politics are, which I don't really like politics, so there's that. But it just means that it's almost like speaking a different language. I mean, Jeff, I think maybe you in your own way can relate to this. Like you were told when you were younger that you could relate to maybe 2% of the people and you should focus only on those people. So it's really hard covering gaps like that and trying to figure out how do we start on like a totally new conversation or new idea.
Well, you told me about the therapist that you worked with that suggested you not cover the gaps, and, and that kind of inspired me. I don't think I try to cover them as much as I used to. My strategy that I usually use is try to find people where the gaps are very minimal, and that gives me more of a chance at communication.
Yeah, I generally I don't know if I try to do that consciously, maybe to a bit of an extent, but I don't try a lot. And when I find a person that I really naturally connect with, so there's clearly a small enough gap that it's covered just in interacting, it's very obvious. I think me and you connect that way. And a couple of my other close friends are like that too. And I maybe most people have this to some extent where it's just better if you meet people who naturally vibe with you. Like if there's something symbiotic or compatible, you don't have to be the same people. It's not about being the same. Maybe it's more about something that it's almost like puzzle pieces. They're not always the same. Well, they probably can't be, really, if you're doing a puzzle, but they actually connect without it being forced. And I almost wonder if it's getting harder to do things like that in a globally connected world. There's so many people going all over the place. There's tons of different cultures, different languages. Now we have the internet. Everything's a mess.
I mean, stats do show that people are having less best friends than they used to. So I think, it is harder to build a connection with someone because I don't know. Sometimes I keep going back to this theory I have because of everything being cheap nowadays. So, and I was looking at something like Netflix, where you pay a subscription fee and you get access to this whole library. And when you divide the number of movies in that library with the amount you're paying, or you're going to pay across the lifetime, each movie ends up being really cheap and like discardable. And I think this interconnectivity gave us the same notion about people. So you get a lot of different options, and it's like, oh, this one didn't work out. No bother insisting on this relationship. I can just find one swipe away. So I don't have to do anything really. I can just go as if I'm blown by the wind in every direction. So I feel that like that could be a state where some people are in right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people certainly act that way as if others are just discardable. I've been on the receiving end of that a lot in my life. And I find a lot of people I've been around in many different environments seem really apathetic and aimless. So I suppose Jordan Peterson talks about that. He suggests that people find an aim or a goal, something to do. And I don't know, a lot of the people I look up to philosophically tend to have that same perspective. You got to find something to do. And once you have something to do that you actually care about, then it means you could succeed or fail, that things become more real. And you probably need other people to do it with. Otherwise, you just get stuck, and then other people become more valuable. But unfortunately, I find a lot of people I've met are hedonistic. There's a lot of access to entertainment and free stuff, and they do the bare minimum to make it by. They don't really like their jobs. It's pretty common. And so they don't really care about other people as much because you can just live in your house and have things drop shipped to you. Yay, modern society. Maybe it's a little too depressing. There's still good things in the world.
I mean, okay, let's look on the positive note of this. So we're three people from different corners of the world talking right now. So you got that. And I also think that what we see it's just a part of it, because at the end of the day, people are still, bars are still full. I mean, not now, but bars were still full, clubs were still a thing, music festivals were a thing. So there is all that going on behind the scenes. I guess the online just turned us into brands, basically. So online, we have to portray this the same way a company behaves online, the same way people have to behave, which is silly. And it takes all the good and bad aspects of humanity, takes them out. You're just a brand, you're just your name dot inc, and that's it. That's all you get to be online. And when you meet people in real life, it's a different thing. You can actually have like a conversation with someone, totally different things. With a drunken conversation, you can shout over each other. You can not shout, but like physically shout because it's crowded and you're drunk and you barely hear. But there's still something there, and at the end of the day, you still shake hands and maybe split an Uber. So yeah.
Yeah, all hope is not totally lost. It's interesting that the examples you gave, clubs, bars, music festivals, they're all entertainment focused. And so I think, on one hand, my frustration much of my life is that even the activities people around me did participate in and were interested in doing was often very entertainment focused and hedonistic. But that's certainly better than nothing. And a lot of times when I've tried to do like community building or start a new project, the way things start organically is in social settings, in an entertainment kind of a way. So maybe it's a double-edged sword, and if you use it right, then it works out really well. But I do find that I get kind of bored because a lot of people are interested only in entertainment. And I think both me and Jeff are pretty creative, and we actually want to do things that it feels like we're building beyond just fun and just like something random that's like, hey, this is kind of fun. I want to do something that feels purposeful and meaningful. I mean, Jeff, you talk about community building like all the time. That's basically your new favorite hobby.
Yeah, well, it is when it's happening. It becomes my new favorite hobby. Right now, I would just settle for fun too. I think things are opening up. People are getting vaccinated and spending less time online. So I hadn't planned for that part of it either. So I'm still holding the space. I think it's definitely a community worth holding a certain type of space for. So I'm still doing that. But where it goes, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, are you thinking it's slowing down right now? See, like with the wait, Alex probably doesn't know about the back porch. Do you want to kind of give the rundown and maybe is there anything new going on?
No, not really. Yeah, you can give them the rundown on all the different groups there.
Yeah, so the Jeff, you're the founder of the back porch, right?
One of them, it's a group
Oh,
of
okay.
peers here in Washington State.
Yep. Yeah, so my understanding is that it's a Zoom group and there's a bunch of breakout rooms for different purposes and anybody can use it. And you try to run it as close to 24 hours a day as possible. And it's pretty international and it's almost like a virtual community center if I had to describe it. Or at least
Yeah,
that's so far the direction it goes.
it's intended to be a drop in, and we keep it going for as long as we have the people around that are willing to keep it going. So it doesn't quite hit 24 hours, but morning to night, at least U.S. time, and it's kind of a hub. Different groups hang out there, different types of people. So it's a place to meet other people and connect. And we're definitely social justice, critical social justice, kind of friendly or sympathetic to people dealing with those experiences. I guess that's all I can think to say right now about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
that's
And we have a Discord along with it. We're kind of using Discord, Facebook, Zoom, what other platforms? YouTube, the podcast. But the idea for all of these is for them to be little portals into this larger community that's growing around these common values, around self determination and autonomy.
so. Yeah, I wanted to say, yeah, I think that's good word. Like you guys seem to be more thin. No, thin is the bad one. Thick skinned than I am, and you're willing to do the grunt work. So I feel like I am getting there slowly in those types of situations. But yeah, I've been mainly focusing a little bit on myself, trying to set some goals for myself, trying to achieve them slowly and carefully and everything. So yeah, because I used to be like drifting here and there, and but like without any purpose, without anything. It's just like, oh, just get to work, come back, and like. And recently, yeah, you start thinking, I don't really like work anymore. And it's not that I don't like the company, it's just I don't like it in general. I'm still fine because it's well paid. I'm still fine. But if I find something on the side, it makes work tolerable, it makes everything else better. So yeah, I think you're definitely onto something here. And I think because I think, what is it, nihilism? I think it's a lot of people are in a nihilist state right now. I do believe that at some point, a lot of them will start asking heavy questions. So you're gonna have a lot of people coming in from those doors in a few years. That's my take on it.
yep.
Well, I think we're ready for it.
Yeah, I know in my experience so far, Jeff sometimes gets a little restless. When we and him first met, I think we were both in a similar struggle. It was kind of frustrating, just feeling like there should be this big explosion of this counter movement, especially because of the events of 2020. And it seemed like we were in a lull where it was pretty at a dead stop where there just wasn't nearly as much happening as we thought maybe there should be. Um, and honestly, for a person like me, I think I should be the first to take action. Just statistically speaking, I am more proactive than most people I've ever met. So I have to think if I'm not taking action in this, I should assume nobody will for at least a while because it's pretty I mean, it's like a mantra. It's a way of looking at it because I know that I tend to be a pretty passionate and proactive person. I have like intrinsic motivation. The fire is ignited and I can't stop now. But and I mean, good things are happening. We're meeting a lot of people. It's just a matter of being the first and then making sure to stay in contact and actually keep supporting that relationship. Otherwise, something that's always annoyed me about different friendships is that the other person doesn't really put in effort to stay in contact and like maintain the friendship. And so that's always frustrated me. And so I try to start by being an example and then try and tell the person you need to put some effort in as well. So as Jeff said, not cover that gap where I'm doing all the work. And then just hope for the best that you meet the right people, I guess.
So I'm gonna say something that's gonna uh, impact your morale. So strategically, you're in a like a Don Quixote position where you're amongst like not the first, but you're battling against windmills. But that does have the advantage that it chips away. So think of it like this: you guys might not be successful, but the people who come after you are going to look at what you did, are going to analyze where you went wrong, and eventually someone will break through. So I do think chipping away is a good attitude. I don't want it to sound very pessimistic, because I'm actually optimistic that you will eventually, people will flock to you. But I also want to give you the heads up that in case it doesn't work out, you're still doing good work and you're paving the way for so maybe some of the people that you've already met are gonna pick up your work.
Wow. Um, that's pretty cool. I don't think you're being pessimistic. I think maybe realistic, and partly because you have some positive thinking for the future. That's pretty cool, though. I mean, I guess in a way, since the events of George Floyd, life has become even more unpredictable than usual for me in my personal life, and then in the bigger picture. And so I'm kind of at the point where I feel like I'm driving a car in the middle of all these tornadoes, and we're fixing it up just in time before the car falls apart. And that's basically life. And I'm kind of having fun, honestly. Uh, so
No,
it
you
just,
should you should enjoy and have as much fun as possible, because and this is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Malice, who's like a political commentator, and he came up with like the white pill concept, where it's like it's gonna be tough, it's gonna be there's gonna be a lot of casualties, but we're gonna win this. And he keeps pointing out, like, look at them, every time they do something like lie in your face, straight in your face. This is, and he points this out, this isn't the behavior of people who are in control anymore. This is the behavior of people who are losing control and will resort to anything to keep it. So that's what you should keep in mind. Every time someone upsets you in like a blatant, on your face type of way, just think, oh, a bunch of people saw this and they're not gonna like it. People who are disconnected, people who, like, you may not know about them now, but they will eventually come in. So yeah.
yeah. Michael Malice is awesome, and what he's saying, it makes perfect sense. I really, for the last 10 years, have thought that the way social justice proponents have been acting is self-destructive first, and most of us are just kind of the unfortunate bystanders that get caught in their storm.
Yeah. And it's also, they preach mediocrity, which I don't know why people would find appealing. Like, oh yeah, everyone should be the exact same and no distinctual way whatsoever, except things we can't change about ourselves. Like, yay. Why? Why shouldn't someone be obsessive over, I don't know, chess, and just uh, smash any other opponent? Why shouldn't someone be obsessed over sports and just go nuts? And that's why I find it I don't find it appealing at all. It doesn't speak to any, I don't know, primitive instincts like that would make me go, ooh, I like this. I'm gonna go that way. It's not appealing in any way or form.
Yeah, me either. Who do you think it appeals to?
I think it knows how to prey on people's guilt. So I think that's like people who feel very fortunate that they have what they have and feel like they haven't earned it, which apparently is a lot more than I thought, or maybe they just value themselves very low, and that's the people they impact. Like people who, I don't know, see some story about something terrible happening in some corner of the world and think, "Ooh, I'm lucky, and I have all this, and I should do something about it." So I guess, yeah, it really knows how to prey on your guilt.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of seeing too. It's this desire to not offend or be seen as polite, or like that drives them to. I don't know. I don't relate to it either. It doesn't appeal to me, but there's something well intentioned, I think, in their mind behind it that
Yep.
it does appeal to. I've just never felt that very strongly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that, Alex, that you mentioned guilt, really. And I also, similar but distinctly different, shame, which I think if a person deals with shame and insecurity, this kind of void within themselves internally, that some kind of ideology is likely to fill that void if they're not discovering something that's really empowering first. And so I really do witness a lot of people who seem to be self-loathing that are social justice
Yeah.
supporters. And a lot of psychologists and I'd say maybe some Buddhists have said that the way you treat yourself is the way you treat other people, or vice versa. And so it seems to be this mirroring effect. And social justice puts on a lot of pressure for people to treat others pretty badly. You have to treat everyone as if they're either oppressed or an oppressor. It's very dehumanizing. I don't think being an oppressor or oppressed is a human experience. And then consequently, you tend to treat yourself that way. And if it's a dog eat dog world, which I have coexisted in many a time, where you have to virtue signal, show that you're a good person by their rules, otherwise you're out, then it's a high stress environment. A lot of people are driven to it because of shame. So you have a lot of ashamed people that are desperately trying to show they're good people now, and it turns into a mess. And I really see it as people caught up in fantasy without ever getting the chance to realize or be exposed to the idea that they may be self-destructive for no good reason. It's kind of tragic in a way. I try not to be too mocking or resentful or stay stuck in those positions because I can see that me getting ostracized oftentimes is a blessing in disguise when a lot of the followers are still stuck, and the person they hurt the most is usually themselves. So I try not to be cruel. I really want to stay an empathic, patient, and kind person in this process.
So you're right about there does seem to be a correlation between low self-worth and adopting this. I mean, there's so many things here. Like, for instance, people see something, they don't know what to think about it. They have this idea that they have to have an opinion one way or the other, when most of the time you don't. You really shouldn't have an opinion about everything. It just is. Maybe you should have like a very superficial opinion like the rest of us. If you don't really care about a particular subject, then just move on. That's fine. But maybe that, like, ooh, something like this happened. what does my favorite, and then insert journalist, comedian, entertainer, think about this. Ooh, they think like that. I like them, so I should think like them. So there could also be something in this area. And there's also something, I don't know, so when George Floyd happened, a lot of people, I kept seeing the expression used, like, get on the right side of history. And I was like, how do you know that? Like, how do you know? How can you, like, yeah, you can make some judgments about how in the future you're going to be seen, but you have to think a little bit. And at the same time, I don't know, you're going to be dead. You're not going to care. Like, I don't know, maybe be the weird one once in a while. It doesn't hurt. You don't have to be on the right side of history on everything. You can't. No one's gonna be that perfect. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a rigid way of thinking. I think it's very uncreative and it's not very open to it's a weird concept, and it definitely I see it as stereotyping past, present, and future, where there's only one direction to move, and that's progress in a positive way. Or maybe they're not even thinking positive, negative, they're just thinking progress. If we're moving
Yeah.
forward in time, technology's developing, whatever it might be, then we should always be pushing for what's the most cutting edge, the most future oriented, and not take anything from the past, which
Yeah.
is, I don't like that. I think of myself as a proud cherry picker when it comes to past, present, and future. I pick the things that I enjoy, that I find valuable, that I'd say support my ability to live an empowered life. And some of that is future technology, that's like cutting edge. Some of that's maybe old fashioned, and maybe things that are kind of in between. I mean, we live constantly in a mix of technologies and language and culture from that's pieces from all different time periods. There are things that are still part of our lives now that were invented millennia ago, like math, the majority of
Yeah.
the languages we speak. To assume everything has to be forward all the time, you have to be on the right side of history. It's a very weird way of looking at life, and I think it's too rigid.
I mean, yeah, like look at math alone, which was passed from different cultures, and so, like every time some empire would fall, like the neighbors would be, okay, we're going to take away your books, we're going to take the books. Oh, this looks interesting, and like we're going to build our own stuff, build our own things until we crumble, and then someone else comes along and like these guys have the right idea, and it keeps going and going. You get what you get, Roman alphabet, Arab, what decimal, not decimal, like figures to indicate numbers. So you get this mixture of things, like all this stuff coming together to form something good.
Yeah. Yep. Alex, what would you say? How would you, if you were just meeting somebody and say you're going to talk like philosophy and values, how would you introduce some of your values or your favorite philosophy? Is there anything in particular that's your main interest?
Uh, I don't know. I don't think I would necessarily say anything out of the ordinary. It would just be more of a like if someone comes along, let's say someone comes along, I'm thinking of doing this, but I'm not exactly sure, and like do it, see what happens. So that's kind of my philosophy is like, and that's why I kind of hear like do it, see what happens. It doesn't work out.
Experimental.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, yeah, weigh in the risks and everything, but at the end of the day, try a new experience, see if you like it or you don't, and then make up your mind. You don't have to be anxious about everything. Like, and that's from my experience because I was anxious most of my life. And I think I missed out on a lot of fun because of that and a lot of good good times or any like something interesting because I don't really want to go. I just want to stay in. I just la la la. And then I got into the other end where you had fear of missing out, which is another thing you should avoid. So it's like try to stand out in your own feet. You don't have to do everything other people do. It's like find your own things. See, do something, try it, see what happens. Try something cringy, for instance, like get that cringe moment so you develop thick skin against cringe and awkward moments. So eventually you'll learn how to laugh them off. And yeah.
Amen. That's awesome. And it's funny you mentioned like cringe and awkward moments. I really think modern people with this, a lot of us have just free access to movies and TV, and everything is so polished and well designed, or at least you have the ability to do that if you want. And I think that makes this perception of awkwardness more common because life is not a movie, and there's all these little in between things that are happening, and it's natural. I don't think of most of it as awkward because I try not to spend too much time like watching movies or I mean, just look at like I don't use Instagram just as an extreme example. Everything I see as an outsider from Instagram that I don't, I think is a lot of it's boring, but every once in a while somebody's like, look at this thing or whatever, and it's just all of these people that take these pictures and they have to line up everything perfect. Everything has to look nice and be polished and photoshopped, and it's because it's like this little bubble that's like a feedback loop on itself. Then it gets more exaggerated until the rest of us as outsiders see it and we're like, these people basically look like aliens. It's creepy.
Yep. Yeah.
So like, I don't want to live in a world like that. I'd rather live in a world where I feel like I'm tied to something natural. I'm still a human being, and there is that riskiness and that unpredictability.
Oh no, I definitely like with Instagram. I agree that place is real nasty. Like I never had an account on that because I kind of felt that way. I still have a Facebook account which I go once in a while, but I mainly keep for Messenger to talk to relatives. And I remember the reason I stopped scrolling through Facebook is a few years back. I was scrolling and I kept seeing. So I was in a weekend in my room by myself, and I was just scrolling through the news feed, and I would see people from high school, people from whatever corners of life I met, a similar age to me, and like wedding, baby, and it just like everyone's getting hitched, and it just made me feel so bad. And I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And I just turned it off and like went on to mind my own business. And another experience is Twitter, and that one is very bad as well. That Twitter is good. So Instagram really messes with your self-esteem. Twitter affects your outrage. So in 5 tweets, I just saw myself getting outraged over nothing, essentially. And yeah, that's how I guess that's how they play on your emotions. And yeah, I kind of stopped with Twitter as well. Like I've accepted ignorance. I wouldn't say as a virtue, but there's something about ignorance where you don't have to know about everything. Other people are equipped to deal with this better than you. You just leave it alone. Just mind your business. I guess not. Yeah, I don't know if mind your business is the same as ignorance, but sometimes you should really go and mind your business and leave it alone. There's no point in you getting worked up over people overseas.
Yeah. Yeah, it's choosing what is worth your attention and your time and your investment. I think that's prioritization, and maybe ignorance is kind of a side effect that, I mean, people that are really focused on a goal or an aim or their family, things that they have choices over, that they tend to be a lot less bothered by things happening in the world way beyond their control. And I mean, maybe it's up to each person to decide how much they want to spend time being aware of other things happening in the world, but it has a lot to do with what your priorities are. And I find that whether it's COVID or George Floyd related stuff or social justice, that I have a limit before I find that it's just too obsessive. And other people tend to obsess around me. And so after a while, even if I'm not trying to obsess, I'm so inundated by other people being that way that I get sick of it. It's like eating the same food over and over and over again. I'm like, I'm just sick of this. I need some balance. I need to do something that's purposeful, and then I need to take a break, and then like let's just cook some food and let's play some music and feel there's a sense of ordinary life, and not everything has to be this grand story or this big conflict all the time. There's still ordinary life.
Well, eventually it's gonna desensitize people. So I don't see, like, I still see, like, since it's COVID and we're talking about vaccines, like you get injected with this poison over and over. At some point you're gonna get desensitized, and it's like some like, let's say you get a lot of people consuming this, becoming immune, and then some nuclear bomb goes off somewhere and like loads of casualty, and the same people are going to look at that and go, oh, okay, and swipe next. It's like, it has to have an impact somewhere. It has to. So eventually all this outrage, you're gonna suck it all in. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's gonna have physical ramifications. So yeah, it's kind of like a big experiment played on us, but it has to have some side effects here and there. And yeah, maybe some of the stuff we're seeing are side effects of all of this. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, Jeff. I mean, of all the people I've met, you seem to be pretty good at prioritizing and kind of staying focused on what matters to you, or finding things to do that seem satisfying and meaningful. Would you say that's, I don't know, like you're a peer counselor too, so you could even compare to like people that you've counseled.
I didn't find it that difficult to stay home the last year and focus on personal projects. Didn't I didn't feel the need to protest last summer when everybody decided to get out on the streets and protest. Whatever was motivating them or breaking their motivation to stay on lockdown, I didn't feel that. I found it very easy to stay home and focus on projects, and that's what I did. So I don't know if I'm a good case to ask in that situation, because I didn't have those issues. As long as there's something interesting to me going on, I can usually focus on it. And COVID was a chance to slow down and redirect and shift my energies onto things that were more personally fulfilling. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I mean, Jeff, you seem like you're maybe more content or adaptable to staying home and still being like really self-directed. Like I'm a really extroverted person, and I find that I need to regularly get out of my house, even if I'm just outside at a park or something, and socialize with other people in person. Otherwise, I'll just get stuck and I'll go kind of crazy.
I live in Seattle. There's no one to socialize with. If I live, I'm serious. If I live somewhere else where it was more of a pleasant experience, I might feel that. But I've been here over 10 years, and I welcome every chance to not have to socialize up here in person.
Wow.
So that part wasn't an issue. And then Zoom filled in like whatever else was missing. Zoom, it's like having the person in your living room, 90 something percent of the experience. So Zoom was really what got me through and gave me those connections that I was missing.
Yeah.
So may I ask, because I'm curious, it's since Seattle's Washington, so I kind of saw the whole evergreen situation and some of the news about social justice in Seattle. And I'm curious, like, why you don't find it appealing to socialize with people over there, or is it just like a big city, so you don't
That
get a
kind of
chance anyway?
happened separate from the social justice, but then looking back, it put it into context for me. And what really got me involved in CTA and Counterweight and these networks was watching the Evergreen documentary, and which happened like a few hours south of me. And that kind of made the light bulb go off of all the stuff I was experiencing over the years. It gave it a larger context for why people were acting that way, where it was coming from. And once I saw that, that's when I decided I had to find other people that were experiencing this the same way I was, because it didn't make sense to me that college kids were taking over campuses, taking faculty hostage, painting professors as racist that weren't racist, and none of that seemed like it should be happening at a functioning university. And so I had to find some kind of sanity back in my life, and that's when I started meeting people like Nemo and Counterweight and CTA, and started doing this community building project. But it was all driven from that need to find sanity from living in this area for so long. And I still underestimate, I think, how, like, even stuff like gay rights, I think it's like a solved issue, or trans or anything like that. And people tell me, well, it's because you live in Seattle. The rest of the country they still struggle and fight over this stuff. So it skews my sense of what's normal, what's progressive, what's been normalized in the rest of the US versus here. So there's a lot of things I take for granted about the US that come from probably living in the bubble that Seattle can turn out
Yeah,
to be.
yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, one thing that I'm noticing is there seems like there's multiple uh, threads happening at the same time with changes in culture, changes in economics, technology. But we'll take culture just to simplify a little bit. I see a lot of social justicey proponents, and then maybe more broadly than that, some of the kind of general liberal culture, at least in America, and I think in a lot of major cities. This is another way I would describe it or specify more. It seems like there's a thread of cultural change that has been gaining speed. And so it's gaining speed over the last like maybe 30, 40 years to the point where people in those pockets are so detached from like certain rural areas that are just way behind. They're getting left behind. So now we have all these different threads and it's like utter chaos, and they're different worlds that geographically could be right next to each other, but they feel like you're walking through a portal. Like in the Twin Cities, we have suburbs that kind of are a donut right around the actual cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so it's a nice gradient between urban to suburban to rural, at least in that sense. But culturally, once you cross certain borders, you can't even necessarily say quite where it is in certain cases, but it starts to feel like you went through a portal and you're in a different world. So, depending on who you're talking to and where they are, it's going to be a totally different story of what reality is. And I think that makes it even more challenging for like the culture war.
Oh, I think yeah, this is a thing that's happening in a lot of places because it's definitely similar in the UK. This one is more political, but I think it's also cultural as well. You get London, which is the most diverse city on the planet, and I don't know how much you guys were familiar with the whole Brexit thing, but basically 75% of people in London prefer to remain in the UK, and then the end result was 52 of the whole country wanted to leave the. So let me start over. 75% of Londoners wanted to remain in the EU, and the final result was 52% of the country voted to get out of the EU. So you got this bubble, which is London, and you had this whole of the UK, which, and I don't know, like I've somewhat become more familiar with these issues, but you got a lot of like cities that used to be industrial that were like leveled off, like living in very poor conditions, who used to be left-wing, socialist, whatever. But the left-wing party in the UK started becoming like the Democrats over there. So they took in more, they tried to expand their appeal to more corporate types, more of these. And then culturally, even though these communities were conservative culturally, they voted left wing because they tend to be like the economics kind of mirrored it. Like they were against big immigration because they saw it as affecting their salaries and unions and everything, and they saw immigration as this more of a right-wing thing because they could bring in cheaper labor, which undercut the union work. And then all of a sudden, the party that they voted all this time started going the other direction, which is more corporate friendly, more immigration friendly. So you saw communities that, since they were established politically, like 100 years or 80 years, never voted right wing in 2019. So that was the impact. And especially like with the Brexit vote, it was one thing. But in the 2019 election, it was just a wipeout. Like the only territory the Labour Party, the left-wing party, gained was this wealthy area in London. And in the rest, they lost loads of territories. So yeah, there's this big, like, people are getting more and more isolated, more bubbles forming.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's pretty messy. The divide between urban and rural areas is getting really extreme. I found that there's more in common in rural areas 1,000 miles apart in the United States with each other than there are between, say, a rural area and its urban city that may be 10, 20 miles apart. And
Yeah, I would agree with that sentence.
yeah, and I haven't traveled a lot, but I lived in New Hampshire across the country, and so that was where I gained some of that experience, and then I've traveled a little bit, but yeah, I have a hunch that the the sense of living in a big city, the more it becomes bigger and bigger and more urbanized, the more it changes a person's experiences in certain ways that leads to different cultural values. And a lot of people in big cities that they can depend on different infrastructure that's already built. It's almost like a safety net in a way. As a youth mentor, a lot of the advice I give is usually for young people to get to a big city if they can, because there's a lot more opportunities and resources for somebody in their position, in their context, usually. Um, and I think that tends to lead people to being less self sufficient and valuing that less, unless you have a certain personality type. So there's some trade offs there, and now we've got the culture wars, and it's a big mess because the reality is there's a lot of ways that cities are very dependent on rural areas, like farmers and the people that actually do the hard work to build things. So if rioters are starting to burn stuff down, then people have to start over. And what are people going to do who are in big cities that have one or two generations where they don't really know as many of those self-sufficient things? We're in this massive exodus where things have to start over.
I mean, yeah, I guess in cities people generally forget these things, and or they aren't taught. I don't know what happens. They don't, like, where I'm from originally. I do have relatives in the countryside, so I still have that connection, which is why I think I find it so easy see where some farmer that from an area I've never heard of, when they talk, I find it easier to see what they're talking about because I kind of know that life and I know the people. Like I don't know that area in particular, but I'm assuming there isn't like there aren't accepting language. There aren't big differences between farmers from different countries. Like you still get the same style of life, the same things, the similar values, similar things, and yeah, I can see that like I can see where they're coming from. So that's why maybe it was easier for me to reject all this stuff because it's like, yeah, the people I know wouldn't really go for this stuff. Or when I talk to them and see how they approach politics.
Yeah. I don't know. Jeff, you're in Seattle now, and you find that there's not a lot inspiring you to interact with people, even though, ironically, you're surrounded by a lot of them.
There really isn't. I wish I had something nicer to say, but I've been here for 10 years and it's been like this. So, um, no, I think I'm ready for a little road trip and explore
Yeah.
different parts of the country and see what else other places have to offer.
Same
Been,
here. Yeah, we both have found we want similar things at this stage of life for both of us. It's very convenient that it's converging that way because we're in different locations, so we have to do this show remotely. That's the nature of the beast. But if I want to do the van plan, I've been trying to do this for like over a year, pretty actively, to get a camper van and start exploring other areas. And so I think the theme between me and Jeff is we're both really disillusioned and you could say black-pilled about our cities. And I tried for so long, for like at least 10 years here in the Twin Cities, to do all kinds of community building things, to build a project, something. And it just, the sabotage was just repeated. And if I'm not going to become a jaded person overall, and I'm going to still do something somewhere, then I got to explore other areas and just start with a blank slate somehow and not get stuck in the same ruts. And I think a lot of people in major cities get too attached to the convenience and a bit of the illusion that it's this really cool, awesome place to be, when I really think that's not as true as it might appear on the surface. So I'm ready to explore, and I'm actually considering just living in a rural area in like a van community or something.
Yeah.
and,
Go.
oh, go ahead. I was just going to say,
No,
if
no.
anyone, we have 2 viewers, so if anybody wants to come on and chat, we can get a link to you. We're open for audience participation. Go ahead, Alex.
I just wanted to say some to just encourage, like, yeah, go for it. See what happens.
Yes, the experimental philosophy that you were talking about. That's a great
Yeah.
philosophy.
I mean, so especially with a plan like this, it's like, what do you have to lose? Seeing all of the country? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? It's like, yeah, try. I don't know. When you're older and you're exchanging stories with someone, it's like, I did this when I was these many years old, and I got to see all these places, and everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, that's cool." So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there's something beneficial just to the travel. I mean, there's always risks. I suppose my camper van could break down somewhere random in the middle of nowhere, but I'm pretty good at improvising. And I don't know, I think it's a real personality difference between like me and Jeff tend not to be um, scaredy cats that want to be rigid and overly prepared. And I think that some people get stuck in that because of early experiences in life and maybe their personality type. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The people I've met that tend to be very cautious tend to lack the skill and the hardiness for life that would allow them to be more relaxed and free. And if they would just invest in that skill and start improvising with smaller things, with less risky things, start on a small scale, anything, then they're going to start to build that skill set and that intuitive understanding so then they can be more playful with life. And they don't have to be stuck in this like rigid, overly cautious lifestyle, which I think would be kind of miserable.
Well, going back to that, like now that you brought this up, going back to the idea of social justice, I do think that it's like it's an easy. I mean, it's not an easy framework because I don't even know what the rules are because they seem to be changing all the time. But it does make life easier for people because it's like, oh, I don't have to care about this. Like I have these rules. I just mind my own business and everything is gonna be fine. I don't have to like I don't have to explore. I don't have to get out of my safety bubble. Just fine. And I guess it does have this appeal to people who don't crave uh, autonomy.
Mm.
But yeah. And as for the vans, just make sure you get some, I don't know, something to cover your signal. So in case something does happen, you get to call a service somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of planning with it, even for me being a person that's not planning oriented as much. But I don't know. I'm not that concerned about it. Honestly, the hardest part is literally just finding a van. It's a really small market. In the US, at least, it seems like the prices are going way up because the van movement's a big deal. You know, a lot of people want to leave their cities, leave where they are, and go somewhere else. It's really chaotic. And also, something I've been hearing about the last couple of months locally is that in a lot of parts of the United States, construction materials are at a massive shortage, probably because a lot of people were destroying things and burning buildings. And so now there's all these construction materials that have gone like exponentially, prices like 3 times as much. I don't know. Maybe I should invest in construction companies.
I don't, I would wait on that because I'm not sure what the next economic crisis will bring along.
Yeah,
So yeah, on that front, I'm in a position where I think I can't think of a place to put my money that I won't lose if something bad happens because the way I see the economic situation is like everything could go like unless I buy physical gold or something, some junk that in the future could be deemed valuable because whatever twist and turn might happen in that dystopia and you would be sitting on a pile of whatever gold equivalent. But the way I see it is, I think a lot of big businesses are going to go under at some point, and a lot of like basically money is like inflation is going to pay. That's how I see it. I don't see. I know when it comes to economics, there is this theory now that the government can control everything, but it's not as much as what the government can or can't do is what people do. So yeah, if they print more money, eventually it's going to lead to inflation. I don't see any way around that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that is that aspect.
We're talking economic collapse. I mean, you know, a lot of people might be wondering, kind of looking around, waiting for some crazy thing to happen because of COVID, George Floyd, post whatever events. And it's really amazing that it hasn't happened to a degree that the average person notices yet, which is really weird. It's like this invisible economic disaster, at least for a lot of people, where you would otherwise expect something to have happened by now. But if you look at, say, the numbers and you see what's coming, at least in the United States, uh, 1/3 of all of the money that exists either as a number in a computer or as physical money in the United States was printed in 2020.
Yep. Yeah, that's why. That's I think I saw somewhere a piece about this, and they were saying the only reason why it hasn't happened yet is because of lockdowns and people not working and people not being around, because one of the contributors to hyperinflation is the number of jobs, and because they're not loads of them aren't available. I think when it's going to kick in is when things are going to look like they're going to go back to normal. That's when it's going to blow up. I don't think something like George Floyd. I think I'm not going to make any predictions because I would look like a fool. But I do think I don't think they have the same public opinion they had a year ago. So, like you said, it's kind of like they're still going at it, but I don't know. Maybe last year it was the fact that it was Trump there and people hated him, and it was like, yeah, we're gonna side with these ones to get him out. And now, when it's a different president, it's gonna be I have a feeling it's gonna be different. But don't take my word for it. I have no idea what's gonna happen, but I don't think it's gonna be as bad as last
Yeah. Well, something I'm really concerned about with economically speaking in that frame of mind or that topic, there's a lot of eviction bans or mandates that almost completely restrict evictions in a lot of parts of the United States. And I know at least here in Minnesota, it's at a boiling point because not only are they banning evictions where it's really, really hard to go through that process, they're also restricting anything related to ending a lease normally if the resident or the renter doesn't want to end the lease. So effectively, landlords are being held hostage. And I've seen firsthand how that it puts major strain on the housing rental market, and it's breaking trust. There's a lot of landlords that end up stuck in situations that are so horrifying that they go under completely and they can't be landlords anymore. And so there's less housing available. And then there's other cases where they just don't want to be landlords because of how little trust they have in their ability to protect against renters that do terrible things. And we're talking like the most extreme cases where there's shootings and those people can't get evicted unless they go to jail because they committed a crime, and on and on and on. So the bureaucracy, the red tape, the strangulated regulations it's a nightmare. And as a person that has worked on housing issues with homeless populations, with at-risk youth, I can say putting this burden economically on landlords entirely or near entirely doesn't just magically solve these problems. It creates problems because now there are renters that have not been paying rent and have just been living in a place almost like a squatter for 6 months to a year that otherwise would have been working or would have maybe been struggling. It's not like it's a great situation, but they would have been pushed to make decisions to maintain their own empowerment or their basic housing record. And now a lot of those people are going to have their housing records ruined because the government is pushing landlords to evict people where you have to build such an egregiously terrible record for your renter to get them evicted at all that they're not going to get housing again. So it's very, very ugly. And that's my rant for the day, but it doesn't help anyone. It makes it worse for everyone.
I mean, yeah, I didn't even know about that one. I didn't even that's one of the things that I didn't even register on my radar. I think in the UK, the government kind of has this, that was called, furlough scheme. So they didn't put, I think they put some bans, but I don't know, like this aspect, I never looked into it when it comes to landlords and freezing rents. But I would have imagined they would have done it better where if a tenant is shitty, they would have still be kicked out. But according to you, not. No. So it looks like, this is definitely going to have some effect because, landlords are going to up the prices to get better, what they would assume is better tenants because they would have more money to pay. And yeah.
Yeah, well, upping the price is one of the things that hasn't been criminalized yet. And it's messy. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I want to get a camper van and just be out of that system as a renter. But I don't know. I'm disappointed in a lot of people in different situations that are making economic decisions that make them more disempowered. Like landlords also try to check your credit score, and that doesn't tell you if it's a good renter. I spent the majority of my 8 years as a really good renter not having a credit score at all. So
Yeah.
it's, I don't know, it's
Yeah,
dumb.
like I only started getting on the credit system a few years ago when I found out about it, because before that I was like, why do I care about the credit card? I don't need a credit card. It's just money that's there that I might actually end up taking all of it, and that's gonna be bad because I'll have to pay it back. So I did eventually get into this because I needed one to rent a car, and then then I saw a different one which gave me some cash back and some benefits, and I was like, okay, might as well, since I'm doing the whole credit thing.
Yep. Yeah, I have a credit score now. I don't really do much with it, but I might have to get a loan to get the camper van. But if I'm gonna be a big fat normie, at least I'll do it with a van rather than buying a house. Hey, my house is like 10 times cheaper and it's on wheels. It's a
Yeah,
win-win situation.
yeah, no, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you do what you can, because there's so many things that I find really wrong, but it's like, where do you even start? Especially when it comes, like, this is the sad situation when it comes to a lot of the woke stuff. It's like we could have been talking about so many different things, and we just get stuck with this, and it's like, really this. And I still, like, at times I still wonder, like, how, why, how, what happened? Then we should be talking about, I don't know, making uh I don't know, flying cars or whatever, something like moon and Mars colonies, whatever, and we're talking about uh I don't know,
People being
the right,
subconsciously racist, and
yeah, like,
there's this invisible white supremacy everywhere.
yeah, yeah, and implicit bias. It's like, oh gee, thanks, I didn't know that. Like, people have biases. Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah, it's biases and assumptions generally are not this inherently bad thing. Like your brain makes categories, and
Yeah,
it's a useful thing. And then when you find out your categories are too rigid, then you update it, you get a little more flexible, you practice being curious, and you move on.
yeah.
It's not that big of a deal.
No, but yeah, at some point I can't help but think this is really a bunch of mediocre people who thought that if they say really mediocre things but with really fancy words, they're gonna make themselves look smarter than it is. And this is what I see, like, in most of these academics. If you're gonna try to explain something and you're gonna use academic jargon that if I have to follow you with a dictionary, then you're at a loss here, because I haven't understood anything. And on top of that, I think you're pretentious, and I shouldn't talk to you again because you use big words when you realize you're not talking to one of your friends. And if you insist on being called doctor, if you studied anything other than medicine by someone like me who isn't an academic, then I might have another problem with you, because really, that's you cling to that title. Is that what, like, I don't know how I should put this, but that title is the most valuable thing you have, and, like, shouldn't you feel like you should earn it from me, like, a little bit, like, explaining something, like, oh, thank you. Anyway, this is
Yeah.
my rant.
Yes, I agree. I dropped out of high school and never went to college, and it's one of the best decisions I made in my life. I would not have fit in college. If I had actually graduated high school or something and then went to college, I just would have dropped out then. So I'm glad that I did it sooner and saved a bunch of money. And my life has been, I mean, there's been a lot of terrible things that have happened, but I still would not trade it for the alternative. And when you're talking about like the way that very academic-y people can be, I do find academics generally to be pretty annoying, unrelatable, and just kind of full of shit. I mean, some people, I can tell they're honest people. They're not very ideological. They just happen to come from an academic background. So then maybe in that case, the worst trait about them from my preferences is that sometimes they speak in a way that's really complicated, that's just unnecessary. I think if you can describe something really simple that is normally complex, that's a sign of wisdom and skill. And it's actually really hard to say things in a simple way and to connect with a variety of people where they understand something. Whereas academic people seems like a lot of times that it's just like a giant circle jerk of using fancier, schmancier words until it means nothing. And it's like, what are you? Seems like a waste of time to me.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with Titania McGrath?
Yep.
So yeah, if you in the books, and like Titania wrote, yeah, like the Andrew Doyle's really good at mixing this jargon. So like I could like I read both of his books or her books, hers, yeah, her books, and yeah, like you could see where he mixes in actual academic text with his jokes. And if you don't know any of these situations, if you don't know the culture and anything, you would read that and you would go, what? This is one big joke. And it's like, no, this part's real. This part, it was made up. Like that's how insane it is. And yeah, just is. But yeah, he's one of the good ones of like understanding and mocking it. And I think at some point he like Titania posted a tweet with an audio version of someone's I forgot some intersectional paper, and the academic jargon in just one paragraph was unbearable. You would see like this academic word, preposition, and it was just like, who knows this stuff? Who's gonna? Anyway, it was fun. It's fun. And sometimes like this is what makes me laugh about it, even though it's sad. The only thing I can do is laugh. So I'll just try to picture it as a one big parody.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a couple of friends that went to college, stayed in college, the whole nine yards, that had a really hard time adapting to the real world once they got into the real world, the rest of life, where most of us are. And they ended up just kind of going back to academic stuff and staying there. And sometimes we'd have really good conversations, I guess, on philosophy, maybe some overlap with, say, this podcast. But I found a lot of the time it was like they were trapped in a certain way of speaking. And oh, I think my camera just went out. It does this every time. It's ridiculous. I need a longer lasting camera battery. But yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I don't need to rant about college academics being obnoxious or whatever. Me and some of my friends do that, maybe a little too much. I joke with people I'm prejudiced against college students.
No, I mean, from my experience, people who remain behind in universities are the people who aren't suited for life, I find. So if that makes any sense, it's like people who were guarded, protected all their lives, and the moment they step out of a campus, they go, no, I can't take it. So they go back into university and they have to continue. Otherwise they end up living in the real world, and that's bad for them.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't know when it became that way. I remember it being very different. College was the transition to adulthood. I don't know when it became that refuge that you just described.
Um, when
um,
increased tuition fees, maybe. I don't know. I can put a
that's a
target
good
on it.
question. I think it was pretty gradual, so it's hard to draw the line in any particular place. But I know a lot of people started paying attention to social justice issues when there were a bunch of college escapades, scandals, protests, kind of in the 2010 early 2010s. But I think that's starting too late. By then, it's like obvious, and yeah. But as far as I don't know, like I know some of the people I know that were into social justice a long time ago, or you mean relatively longer ago. They got into it in college in the 90s. So I guess something was going on there too. And honestly, if I look at, say, my parents' experiences and my sister, who's like 10 years older than me, and if I look at like even some of the TV shows that were popular in the US in the 90s and the 2000s, uh, it seems like certain parts of social justice were almost more mainstream and more popular than the now. Like feminism. It seemed like some variation of feminism was pretty popular in the 90s and the 2000s. I certainly grew up with it.
So there was these things, what, like the currents were there since like 60s and 70s. They were forming like, I don't know, people like Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But when the campus itself became this, I guess, for lack of a better word, a safe space where it's isolated people, I can't really connect. I can't really think of any time that would have happened. Like I'm not all that familiar with Western University, so I don't know. I can't connect it to anything. But if you're familiar with Christina Hoff Summers, she was talking about attending these types of workshops in the 90s. And she saw over there where they made these groups based on skin color and gender. And then it kept segregating and segregating. So she has this clip of like these groups becoming smaller and smaller based on these characteristics. And at the end of every workshop, it was the same result. They started arguing with each other. So this was in 90s. So these things were happening. It just blew up in the mainstream with these incidents, new media, I think, like so, and combined with social media, and new media found these exploits in the algorithms to promote their news, and that's how they noticed that outrage sells. So all these things started becoming like news outlets were incentivized to hire these people because they wrote about this stuff. So if you got finally your gender studies degree was put to good use in journalism. So yeah, like now you can't even make that joke anymore that, oh yeah, good luck finding a job with that degree. No, you're gonna get paid really well nowadays. Until
Yep.
you don't, because these industries are somewhat falling apart, but there's still a place in like people in HR departments in tech companies. So, or a chief diversity officer at a university which pays six figures. So it's not a bad result for that type of a diploma.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very amusing crossover with the concept of bullshit jobs. There's a book by that title. I don't know if either of you have heard of it, but the idea is that in modern times, wherever we draw that line, there's all these jobs that aren't really very valuable, but people get paid very nicely. And I think it's only really possible because there's a lot of societies that are very materialistic and there's a lot of access to resources. So, to some extent, people and companies can waste resources on these really dumb jobs that aren't providing tangible value to anyone in particular. And I don't think I've had like a really total, like 100% bullshit job, but I've had a lot of jobs where there's some part of it where it feels like a waste of time, that I could do way fewer hours and I would be just as productive, if not more productive. And I don't, it's kind of a goofy situation. And now there's this weird crossover where there's people with college degrees in not very useful things that are now getting those bullshit jobs. Like, I think I had a roommate that had a double bachelor's degree in opera and uh, cross cultural something something LGBT dance. I don't remember what the other one was, but it was very ridiculous. It was like LGBT themed plus ethnic cultural something, and it was dance. So I guess it was just they know different dance types, and
Do
they
you
got
need a
some kind of
degree for that?
yeah, it was really weird. And they didn't have a fancy schmancy job when I first met them, but they got some kind of a corporate office management job. And I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna make this up as an example. I guess Pepsi needs a specialist in lesbian dance theory for their marketing department.
I mean, yeah, no, but like that's the interesting part. You see these people popping up in marketing or social media managers. And it's like it's so disconnected, and it's like if you recall the whole Gillette ad thing about toxic masculinity, like you realize you're selling most of your products to men. It's not like what were you hoping, like some collective moment where all the guys are like, "Ah," and it's like, okay, guys, let's stand together. Thank you, Gillette. You opened our eyes. Like, what were they thinking with that ad? But
Yeah,
yeah, it pops up, and you see the. This is why it's good to laugh at this, because you see the cringiness, and you also see the disconnect. You see that these people, they have their spreadsheets, they have everything, but they have no idea who's buying their product. And I mean, and it's good. I actually enjoy it nowadays when it happens to corporations, because since they dominate, and it's either monopolies or oligopolies or whatever, it's actually good that they're self-sabotaging, because someone can creep up and pick up, like some small razor company in this case can come up and pick up some of those guys that said, no, I'm not buying Gillette anymore. And that's a good thing. That's why when I see companies self-sabotaging like this, I go, no, go on full steam, full steam. I would become like one of these BS consultants myself if I have the time, and just go in these places and just help them sabotage while making loads of money from it. If I had the, I don't know, if I could keep a straight face during all of this, I would definitely do it while there would still be money.
yeah, there's some great humor available with how absurd everything is. If we're talking with the Gillette thing, we know that the majority of their customers are men, not just because of the usual obvious stuff, but because a certain brand of feminism and women's liberation encourages women to stop shaving their legs and armpits for freedom. So there's a lot of women in those movements that aren't shaving at all. So it just gets even more ridiculous. It's like I have a hunch that there are a lot of people in marketing positions that don't know a lot about social justice, that get into kind of corporate jobs, that maybe they're just a couple steps removed and they only encounter it in ways where they don't recognize what they're encountering. Maybe it's like their sister saying, "Ooh, women's liberation, let's go to the women's march," or whatever. And they only get these little bite sized experiences. And then from a distance, the only people, if they're like wearing their binoculars saying, "Who should I market to?" It's like they see the loudest people and they're like, well, this is where culture is, so let's just go with it, and it fails miserably.
Yeah. That's definitely it. I don't think they're all that connected. I think they're career focused people. So they skim a few headlines, they read a few articles, and that's it. And if you want to see their mindset, you should go on LinkedIn because the cringe there is amazing. Like LinkedIn is the best place. If you want cringe, you should go on, make a LinkedIn account, follow a bunch of middle managers because the cringe will be unbelievable. It's like all the things, like nonstop quotes about how to be a leader versus a manager and all this stuff. And it's just amazing. It's cringe central. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant place to be. It's, oh my god. I was thinking at some point maybe making some alt account and just have fun, like, because it's one of those places. It's not like Twitter where you have all these satire alt accounts that kind of spoof. I don't know the rules and the terms of the service, but I do feel like at some point I should create one of these alt LinkedIn accounts and just flip the whole corporate world, because yeah, it's corporate central. Everything you see is activisty stuff, but they don't really understand them, but they just share it around because it's fun. And yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely recommend LinkedIn for cringe.
Yeah, so you can be that the gif of Michael Jackson eating the popcorn just in the audience, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a very amusing place if I'm just watching for entertainment. I don't enjoy actually using it for any serious purposes. It's definitely not my cup of tea. Um, we usually end about 12 minutes ago, technically,
Oh, sorry.
unless things are no. I mean, if we're having a fun time, if things are going well, we kind of be casual. I do have to go soon, but Jeff, I was kind of wondering if you had anything you want to say, hop in here.
No, I think this was good. Alex, I'm glad you stopped by. Thank you for being on the
Oh,
show.
thank you. Thank you. It was fun to be here. It was fun to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, anytime. I think this was a good conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, isn't it cool how much we were able to relate to and like have kind of shared references culturally being in like very different places that attest to the power of the internet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was great. It was great to rant for a little bit. It was great to get to know you guys. So, and yeah, whatever it is you're doing uh, in your own corners, keep at it. And I'm sure in the future it's going to pay off.
Well, thank you very much.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks.
As always, everybody, if anybody's watching or listening, me and Jeff, we're connected in a lot of different online groups. We'll put links somewhere, description, comments, wherever, to the back porch, this nice little social group we've talked about today. Um, we all kind of met at different times in Counterweight. You can find that on counterweightsupport.com. If anybody wants to be on the show, or if you want to participate in some way, or you just want to talk to me and Jeff for some other reason, you can email us at jeffandnemo@gmail.com, and we'll be around.
Okay. Thank you.